بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Salamun alaykum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verses 34 through 39, I believe, tells us about another story, another piece of information, or pieces rather, that together form a description of Sulaiman. They form an account regarding Sulaiman that God tells us that is supposed to show us the description that God gave us in the earlier verse that we discussed in a previous session, which was نِعْمَ الْعَبْدِ إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. He is such a good abd, a good slave, we said, as those words mean, is an obedient one. إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ, he frequently returned back to God. He would know that he is not someone that can do things without God, someone that can know what to do that is correct without God, someone that relies on himself. No, he frequently referred back to Allah. In this story, God says, وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّا سُلَيْمَانَ وَأَلْقَيْنَا عَلَى كُرْسِيِّهِ جَسَدًا ثُمَّ أَنَابَ. Surely, laqad, there's two articles of emphasis, two huruf. One is lam, la, and qad. These are for emphasis. Laqad fatanna, we certainly fatanna. Fatanna, or the root of the word fitna in this form right now we have in this verse, it's a verb, it's a past tense verb. It has a variety of meanings, and just like any language that contains words, all languages as far as I understand have this, where words have multiple meanings, and the context is what determines what the meaning is. In here, as various translations have mentioned, it's that he was tested. Now, I don't necessarily agree with translations when it comes to the verses of the Quran, but in this case, it is a valid translation. لَقَدْ فَتَنَّا, we certainly tested Sulaiman. وَأَلْقَيْنَا عَلَى كُرْسِيِّهِ جَسَدًا ثُمَّ أَنَابَ, and we dropped or put or left ala kursiyihi, on his throne, jasadan, a corpse, thumma anab. What did he do then? After this was done, God says we did this. We're going to come back to this. We're right now just getting through the words and then come back and see what full picture we can understand of this. After we put that jasad, that corpse, on his throne, what did he do then? Thumma anab. Inaba is very similar in meaning, again, a phenomenon that is common in languages. More than one word has, or two or more words have the same meaning. We call them in English synonyms. So awab was mentioned before, and that was a word, the root and this word are similar. Awab in that form means he frequently does that he returns to God. Anaba here is a verb, and it means that he turned to God. he turned, but obviously to God. And how do we say obviously? Well, the Quran generally uses that word in that context, but here, moving into the next verse, God says, قَالَ. The inaba that occurs, the returning to God, is the following. قَالَ رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي وَهَبْ لِي مُلْكًا لَا يَنْبَغِي لِأَحَدٍ مِّن بَعْدِي. O Allah, O my Lord, Rabbi means my Lord. He said, my Lord, اغْفِرْ لِي, cover up, forgive, and other words that have been used for, or as translations or equivalents for the word غفران. Forgive me, cover up my fault, my flaw, my shortcoming. وَهَبْلِي, and gift me mulkan, grant me mulkan, a kingdom, لا ينبغي لأحد من بعدي, a kingdom that is not suited for anyone after me. إنك أنت الوهاب, verily you, he's referring to God obviously, or as he said, his Lord, verily you are the gifter, granter, al-Wahhab, the one who gives, the one who, the verb there was heb, it's a request. The verb tense is called amr, but amr means command, okay. But when it comes from someone who is low to the king, to God, then that's not do this, it's rather a request. That's what we would call it. So it's a supplication, a request. And here we have a different form of that word, which is that he's saying, certainly you are someone who grants a lot, who frequently or generously grants. Then God continues the same story, the same account. فَسَخَّرْنَا, fa is tafri'. So, سَخَّرْنَا لَهُ الرِّيحَ تَجْرِي بِأَمْرِهِ رُخَاءً حَيْثُ أَصَابَ. We, sakhara is to make malleable for someone, or grant control to someone, allow that person to make use of this, okay. For that to be subdued to this person. Excuse my deficient language. So we provided him the control. فَسَخَّرْنَا لَهُ what? الرِّيحَ, wind. تَجْرِي بِأَمْرِهِ رُخَاءً حَيْثُ أَصَابَ. It flows by his command, رُخَاءً, softly, حَيْثُ أَصَابَ, where it hits. I'm going to come back because there's things that have been mentioned. I don't necessarily want to address or mention what has been mentioned, but I'm going to explain what this is and compare other verses that have a similar idea but with a different description. وَالشَّيَاطِينَ كُلَّ بَنَّاءٍ وَغَوَّاصٍ. Shayateen, generally in the Quran, refers to jinn, this creation of God that in Surah Ar-Rahman particularly God puts alongside us, and in ways we are similar in that we are accountable for our deeds. We are beings that God has provided understanding and a freedom to choose, an ability to choose their path, and the path we choose will dictate where we are in this world and the next. In that regard, we are similar, but in many other regards, we are different. The jinn which are not good are referred to as shaitan, and there is the shaitan, the devil, as we would say in English. Maybe a good equivalent for shayateen would be demons. I don't know if that is the best equivalent. But these are beings that are not visible to our eyes. That doesn't mean that they don't have material bodies. God is very clear. And material, I mean it in the broad sense of the word, as opposed to a spirit that is non-material. God says that we created them from flames, from fire. Okay, well, fire is material. The same way that we are made out of clay, our initial creation was from clay, and then lineage is by, as God says, God says, a fluid. Jinn, we are told in the Quran, the initial creation was from marijin min nar, a flame of fire. And from there, then they reproduce in the way that God knows, and at least I can't recall a description of that in the Quran. But that means they are material, but we cannot see them. That's also explicitly mentioned in the Quran. I don't want to have an elaborate discussion on what jinn are. I just want to make it clear that this is referring to beings that are not good beings. That's why they refer to as shayateen, the plural of shaitan, devils, if we may use the word devil as an equivalent for shaitan. The plural of that would be devils. So they are not good, otherwise they would be good jinn, mu'mineen, and that's mentioned in the Quran as well. That they say, inna minnal mu'minun, if I remember the right Arabic words to that. So of us are the believers, and then there are the others. So shayateen would be referring to the jinn who are not good. وَالشَّيَاطِينَ, in other words, this is saying, and also sakharna. Okay, this is continuing along that line. One of the things we gave him the control of was wind. The next thing are ash-shayateen. He had control over jinn. كُلَّ بَنَّاءٍ وَغَوَّاصٍ. All of the shayateen, not the good jinn, not the mu'mineen jinn, all the ones that were banna, they were into construction, and all the ones that would do ghaws. Ghaws is diving. He would have them dive into the waters and bring from beneath the surface what he commanded them to bring. Now, the descriptions are not there with full detail about what they were able to take out from under the water, but one of the things clearly are various forms of jewelry and adornment, or objects that can be used for that purpose, like pearls. But that's what he would have them. So banna, he would have them involved in construction. Perhaps the temple he built, he used these jinn, and there are descriptions outside of the Quran I know that refer to that and mention that he did take advantage of their the power that God gave him over them to do good. One of them was to construct the temple. Another structure that God tells us about in the Quran in a different chapter is this very magnificent palace that the Queen of Saba was brought to, and when we inshallah cover that story, we'll tell the details there. But there was something there, some form of glass or something similar to that was the flooring of the palace, that she thought it is water. She'd never seen anything like that, and she's a queen. They have a civilization that is relatively, at least, advanced. I don't know which civilization at the time was the most advanced beneath Suleiman's, because he had, as we're reading right now, this is the description of his kingdom, he was able to do things that none other were able to do. So banna, construction, ghawas, diving and bringing things from beneath the surface of the water. وَآخَرِينَ مُقَرَّنِينَ فِي الْأَصْفَادِ. I'm going to leave this part for another session. These descriptions, I said that up to verse 39. I'm going to read it. I'm not going to explain this too much. I just want to get to the following. هَذَا عَطَاؤُنَا فَمْنٌ أَوْ أَمْسِكْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. What I want to, and I won't even translate, it'll take too long. This part finalizes and completes this story. And what are these last lines? They are God's response to the prayer, the supplication, the request that Sulaiman made. So let's break down the story and go back to the earlier parts, because that's the part that people have, I don't know what the reason is, but some things, details that are mentioned here have not been uncovered, have not been discussed, and certain other things have been discussed that are unclear to me why they were accepted. Now it's clear where they came from, but anyhow, I'll get back to that. So let's break down the story. The first thing God tells us is that he tested Sulaiman, and that test is in the form of a corpse being put on his throne. Second is his inaba, his turning to God, which is a supplication. Two supplications. One is ghufran, asking for forgiveness. Second, asking for a kingdom. This is going to be an important clue, along with another clue that was already mentioned. I'll get to it. But second is his inaba, which is a supplication. We're explained, or an important part of that turning to God is a supplication that we'll have to understand. And the third part of the story is God telling us his response to the supplication, which is the type of kingdom that Sulaiman was given and what he had. And some of that description is here. The description of it is found in other chapters of the Quran as well. What can we understand of this? Are these details, these 3 points that were mentioned, are they independent, just haphazardly? Facts are mentioned. One thing is we tested him in a certain way, and then the idea of him doing inaba, okay, that's one thing. Inaba is just turning to God, and then this dua is something separate. That's a third thing, I guess. And then God giving him that kingdom, is that a fourth thing that just random haphazard details about Sulaiman? It doesn't seem to be like that. It seems very clearly, it's very clear that this is telling us a full story. There are two stories that were mentioned about Sulaiman. The first we discussed in another session. This is the second story. It's all connected. There is a test. What is this test? It's a corpse on the throne of Sulaiman. No further details need to be mentioned to us for us to know that this is a very, very difficult test for Sulaiman as a king, as a ruler. He's someone that God has put in that position after Dawood, that in the way that we all relatively or know some details of that story of how Dawood came to be the king. All right. But after him, Sulaiman took over. The throne having a corpse, somehow it seems these are taken as something supernatural. Somehow just out of the blue, a corpse ended up on the throne of Sulaiman, and that's it. No. God says, Al-Qayna. Okay, we. When God says we, Allama Tabatabai has mentioned this. I learned it from him. Maybe he learned it from someone else. I don't know. His explanation is solid. This is the only way that we could make sense. God does not refer to himself as we, as he is single. He emphasizes that all over the Quran. But when it's we, he includes his creation that he uses in the process of making something happen. For example, he talks about the rih, the winds that he controls, the rain that he controls. All these different things, these phenomena that we are familiar with, all right, that God says we do this. It's him with his creation, the various elements that he makes a certain phenomenon like gravity, like the earth revolving around its own axis or revolving around the sun that God tells us about in the Quran. All of these God says we. So he does it. He uses these elements within his creation. All right. None of those are doing anything independently. When he says we, saying I, and I use these. So what we see are what scientists, the parts that they have actually correctly understood, not the mistakes that have been made. Those are the causes within the world of creation that we've been able to identify that are God's agents to make something happen. God refers to himself and all those agents as we. Al-qayna. Okay. Corpses don't just fall in places. And when God wants to say this is a supernatural phenomenon, he makes that very clear. Very clear. He doesn't leave any room for guesswork. When he talks about the miracles, what Jesus did, what Moses did, here when he says Al-qayna ala kursiyihi jasada, there is nothing suggesting that this was a supernatural phenomenon. The conclusion is, how do corpses end up on a throne? People put them there. Right? It doesn't say that person was killed there. Al-qayna ala kursiyihi jasada. We made people have a jasad there on his throne. Why would people want to do that? To create a problem for the ruler that is ruling. What that problem is, meaning what exactly they were trying to pull off, not their objective, that is clear. They're attacking the throne. They want to dethrone him. All right? People used a corpse that they had put one way or another on the throne of Sulaiman, and that was used to attack his throne so that he is removed and they take the throne. That is always, anytime you have power, you have people that want to take that power for themselves. All right. This plot, all God tells us about of this plot is the following. Al-qayna ala kursiyihi jasada. When you have a ruler, he clearly sees that people are plotting to dethrone him. How do you behave? This is a very difficult test. Rulers who seem at a certain point just, they seem like they are wise. They seem like they understand. When it comes to the throne, they become ruthless. They kill. History is filled with such examples. What did Sulaiman do? This pious man, this prophet of God. God says, ثُمَّ أَنَابَ. ثُمَّ أَنَابَ. He came to God in this difficult test. He realizes it's God testing him. God is in control. He's a muwahhid. He's a monotheist. He doesn't just go and do whatever the heck he wants. No, he comes to God. What does he say? The first thing he says, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي. God, he's not an arrogant person. Oh, they did this. God, do this to them. No. First thing is, اغْفِرْ لِي. God, I have shortcomings. I am flawed. Forgive me. Then he asks God for a supplication. I don't understand why this supplication is not understood in the right way. People have questioned, and it is a question when you don't understand it in the context of the story and understand what is going on here. Like, why did Suleiman make such a supplication? Why did he ask God for that? Because he was in power because of God. He's not a person that wanted to rule like kings do. He's a prophet of God that was given this obligation to rule over people based on God's just rules. Make sure everyone receives what God wants them to receive, as opposed to tyrants who do the opposite. Now, people who would become tyrants if they had that authority have come and created the scene to remove him from that position. God has told him, you've got to keep this. So he wants to do his job and keep this, but the way God says, and he's asking God, they want to remove me from this position that you want me to be in. I make you a request. I'm going to make a request from you. Not only do not remove this from me, give me a mulk opposite to what the kafirin want, what the kuffar of Banu Israel, the ones that killed prophets, like God described plenty of times. This is from within the community. They want this prophet removed not because of me, but because they're going against your will. You strengthen your will and do the opposite of what they are wanting. Give a kingdom that no one will ever see after this. That's why the dua is made. He's not desiring to be the most powerful person on the face of the earth. And in fact, he wasn't. He wasn't. A mulk, a type of kingdom that no one else will have. His kingdom no one else has had. Now there are a hadith about the 12th Imam that when he comes, some of those things are going to be happening. Based on this verse, everything that was happening is not going to happen. I don't know what part of it will not, but God says this was the supplication that Sulaiman made, and he says we gave him. And the descriptions are such that we don't find anything after. And from that wording that God approves of in the Quran, a prophet made that dua, it's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean he's the most powerful person. It doesn't mean that. He only ruled over a small part of the globe. The 12th Imam is going to rule over the entirety of it with the will of the people. It's going to be a system that the people of the world want, and they will support him collectively. That for another time. So I think we're done with what we wanted to do in this session. It's going to be a little too lengthy if I want to continue with the details. I will have another session talking about the details. The summary is, the test of Suleiman was about his throne being challenged and that it wants to be taken away from him. He had two wrong choices to make, and he made neither of them. He made the third choice, which is the right decision to make. One wrong decision was to say, you know what, I never wanted to rule anyway. You want it? Take it. I don't care. I'll leave. He's not allowed to do that. God didn't allow him to do that. The other thing to do is, because he wants the throne, to fight and do whatever the heck he wants. Forget God and what God wanted him to do and God's methods and so on and so forth. Again, there's a lot of details that are not there. We've got to understand from the words that are there some of these details in a broad sense. So God doesn't say he didn't start killing people, he didn't start doing this. How does he tell us that? He says, ثُمَّ أَنَابَ. That's the opposite of what a king whose throne has been challenged by people under him does. All right, that's the opposite of it. Not the exact. Well, it's something that such people don't do. They don't go to God. They go nuts. They start doing all kinds of stuff. He didn't do that either. So one thing people do that are not there for God, that do not care about what God has said, is to say they're weak people anyway, or they don't really care. Just take a little something. They'll just be quiet. It wasn't about God and what He wants. It was about me. I don't feel like dealing with this. I'll just sit aside. Just give me a little something. I'll move on and do whatever. Just don't kill me. All right. The other thing is get angry. You go all over the place. Kill whoever you can. A terrible dictatorship. Sulaiman didn't do either of them. ثم أناب. He went to God. He started with Ghufran. He made a request from God about his throne, which was that give me more, in a nutshell. And then God tells us what He gave him, the more that He gave him, the part that Sulaiman probably couldn't even imagine. He didn't say how. He just said, give me a mulk that no one else would have. I want to do this for you. They want me out of this position. Give me a kingdom that will not be seen ever after this. And God describes to us what that which He granted him was. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.